Hey everybody, it's Alexander Dahl with Manifest Vitality once again. So I've got another interview ready to go. We'll go ahead and get straight into that one. I don't really have too much else at the moment. Um, there's plenty more that are coming down the line. I've been doing interviews pretty much every day for the past month, and I've got about a week left to go. So we'll just keep putting them out as they're ready. All right, here you go. All right, so I'm currently on the phone with Jim. He's another one of the musicians that reached out about the current interview series. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the opportunity to introduce himself.
Hi there, I'm Jim Combs. I lead a band called Sensitive Chaos, and I also play in a band called Black Fox here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Excellent. And I always like to kind of start at the beginning. So, what was it about music that you first kind of latched onto and really kind of made you feel like you wanted it to be a part of your life?
Well, I was around music as a kid. My folks always played music, but it was really kind of later when I decided that music was something I really wanted to go after. I had taken piano lessons in grade school and then did some viola lessons and recorder. And so I had a lot of lessons under my belt. But it was really when a friend of mine turned me on to Rick Wakeman and the music of Yes when I was in high school. And it really captivated me. And that led me to find out about synthesizers and keyboards. And so I had, taken piano lessons, but it kind of got me reinvigorated around that. And I ended up building a synthesizer, and kind of that was the catalyst that moved me forward.
Nice. So, how did you actually get into the process and the nitty gritty of like learning how to build your own synthesizer?
Well, I was lucky because I couldn't afford any of the synthesizers that were out at the time, but there was a company in Oklahoma City called PAIA, and they made kits. And I knew how to use a soldering iron, and I figured, well, I can just get the kits, and that was kind of the starting point of getting the bags of resistors and capacitors and
Mm-hmm.
LEDs, and learning kind of how they went together. And so it was really back then the internet wasn't around, and so you kind
Mm-hmm.
of had to do it word of mouth
Mm-hmm.
and just look in magazines and read the ads in the back of Keyboard Magazine and stuff like that. So it was a lot of reading, a lot of finding people that were kind of already doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just kind of reaching out and finding help with these small companies that were doing stuff.
So, what would you say is kind of one of the more complicated aspects of actually building the synthesizer from like actually doing like the patch cables versus, the oscillators? Like, what about it do you think is not so beginner level?
Well, it actually was pretty beginner level for me because it forced me into kind of learning the basics of synthesis and kind of signal flow. So starting with an oscillator and then running it into a filter and running it into a voltage control amplifier, and then having modulations around those things to make it. I think probably at that time it wasn't the best synthesizer in the world, so it had a hard time keeping tune and being in tune across the keyboard. So what I learned is that you really needed to have an understanding of the underlying electronics,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I've learned over time, but I didn't necessarily have at that time. And eventually graduated to a more professional synthesizer where a lot of that stuff was kind of taken care of out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it was a monophonic synthesizer, and just learning to play a monophonic instrument is a lot different than playing a piano where you've
Mm-hmm.
got a lot of different notes and whatnot. So um, I guess really any instrument that you start with is going to force you to try to decide, am I going to overcome all the things I don't know about the instrument, and really practice and learn how to get beyond that to the point that you're making music that people look at you and go, oh, he knows how to play,
Sure, definitely. The talent side of it. Well, I mean, I guess either way, there's talent involved. It's just different, technical versus artistic, I suppose. Um,
Exactly.
so when you approach like a synthesizer, like a store made one, do you look at it completely differently based on the fact that you know how to do like the circuit bending and all that?
Well, I think what what you look at, and I think it's especially that modular synthesis has taken off, and is so big. More recently in the past couple of years, it's really seen a resurgence. Um, there, there's that idea that you can really put your thumbprint, or your personality into creating sounds that may never have been heard before, right? By just
Mm-hmm.
approaching it in a very uh, experimental fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the things that are more keyboards that kind of have a set of sounds in them, a lot of presets. Even I've got a pretty good collection of keyboards now, and even the ones that have thousands of sounds in them, um, it requires a different way of thinking to really get into them to make things your own.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the modular stuff forces you to create your own sounds, as the starting point. Whereas other keyboards, you have the ability to start with things that other people have already created.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's how you put those together, and it's not necessarily going to sound the same as the person that programmed it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, but it's just a different way of approaching it.
Sure, that's very fascinating. So, getting back to kind of the subject matter, once you kind of had the artistic side of it, and you were able to play the thing. How did you kind of go about putting yourself like into a band or putting yourself out there to look for other musicians to play with?
Yeah, I ended up, in addition to that first synthesizer, I got a Farfisa organ, and a band in my high school eventually said, "Hey, we understand you've got some keyboards, and we're doing some tunes that have keyboard parts. Would you like to join us?" And so it was it was just an opportunity thing where I had equipment and they needed to add that kind of sound to
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing, and that got me into it. They were much better musicians than I was at the time. They
Mm-hmm.
had all been performing in orchestra and jazz bands and rock bands, and so it was a learning experience for me. And that's kind of been the way that I've progressed. Always try to find bands that are at a higher level than I'm at,
Sure.
so that I can try to keep improving and uh, learn to add my whatever I do best in these new contexts. So
Okay. And how many bands would you say you put your talent to before you ended up in the bands that you're currently in?
oh gosh, quite a few. Probably I don't know, 10, 10 or 15 bands before I wound up here in Atlanta,
Mhm.
and then a couple before I wound up in the current bands that I'm in. So,
Okay. And do you have kind of a typical genre that you lean towards, or do you kind of just go where the wind blows?
well, it's interesting. I started out definitely, coming out of that rock and um, I was kind of late 70s, early 80s, so rock and then new wave, um, and then progressive, well, not progressive, but alt rock
Mm-hmm.
in the 90s. Once I got to Atlanta, I decided that I really kind of wanted to do more electronic. And so kind of changed my direction at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then I ended up winding up playing in bands that were kind of folk rock and alt rock again. And then Black Fox is kind of another in the definitely in the rock vein. My own music tends to be more ambient electronic and more space music,
Mm-hmm.
but then the bands that I play with tend to be more rock. So I get to do a lot of different style of music.
Excellent. Um, so with the couple bands that you have, where would you like to see those develop into?
It's interesting because I've kind of uh, let go of pointing bands in a certain direction, and I'm more about recruiting or becoming part of a band where there are really interesting musicians involved. So for the band that I lead, it evolves. The members kind of come and go on different albums. Some people stick around for a while. Other people will be on one record and then go away, and new people will come in. And I really let the band evolve as those players come in. My most recent record with my own band featured somebody that was involved, had started the band Snarky Puppy, which is a real jazz influenced band out of Denton, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and so he brought a real jazz feel to the record, which was great. We had jazz elements, but this really moved it in that direction. So just kind of went with it, and then with the other bands that I'm in, it's really uh, either where the band leader wants to go. So started out in one band that was heavily folk based, but then that band became more and more rock based as things went on. And then with this other band that I'm in right now, the band started out kind of very kind of blues slide guitar based, very swampy um, rock, but now we've gone in we've it's a big band, it's a pretty big band now, and a lot of the pop elements are coming out with a lot of vocal, multiple harmony vocals and uh, atmospheres and whatnot. So I really just like to go where the talent wants to go, or where the kind of the universe is taking us.
Sure. And so what are some really prominent memories that stick out to you, whether it be going to a show or getting your bands together? What are some really strong memories that you have?
Well, they typically revolve around live performances. So I remember that first band that I was in high school. The first big show that we played, which was in a big auditorium, was full of people, and just that adrenaline rush of performing in front of that many people. I remember another band that I was in, where it was a small club, and but the band was just I don't know, just something came together, and it felt like the band was just floating. We were just so locked in to the songs that we were playing, and the reaction from the audience. And then in one band that I was playing in, we actually got to open for the Indigo Girls for a set of 5 shows. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the biggest shows that I've been in, and the largest venues and biggest audiences. And it was just great to be able to experience that a little piece of what the Indigos girls kind of feel on a regular basis. Every night that they're performing, they're getting this huge energy from the audience and playing these really fabulous venues with great sound. So it's really been around those kind of performances where I think things really stand out.
Awesome. So what are some links where people can actually take a listen to your music and listen to what you're doing?
So my band is called Sensitive Chaos, and we have a website that's sensitivechaos.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of that. You can actually find us on Spotify and all of the um, streaming venues as well. Got a new album out right now called Closer to Home, so check that out. Um, Black Fox is blackfoxmusic.net, and those are the best places to catch up with the music.
Excellent. And I always like to give the person that I'm interviewing the opportunity to put out their last word. So just a message that you kind of feel resonates with you.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in the coming out of the pandemic and maybe stepping back a little bit into the pandemic at the moment. Um, uh, I think that what myself and my music friends really strove to do is, no matter what the situation is, find ways of connecting to audiences. And so whether it's finding an online venue where you can perform and get your music out when we're not necessarily wanting to go back into venues, or finding a safe way to um, have a live performance and get back in front of folks. I think that the best thing is just to keep getting the music out in whatever way you can, and just make sure that you're keeping yourself safe and everybody else.